What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burnett as we continue a look ahead to the 2024 season. A couple of weeks ago, I took a look at the Florida Gators 2024 schedule, talking about how I think it's the toughest in college football, but I think the Oklahoma Sooners' journey into the SEC will be right up there with the Gators. The Sooners have an extremely tough schedule, especially down the final stretch of the season. I'll get into all of their games this season and what I expect from the Sooners this year. But before I do, if you go on to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I post. But without further ado, let's dive into the Sooners. And starting things out, these Sooners will have a brand new look on offense, really all over. They have a new quarterback, a new offensive coordinator, and a new offensive line. They bring in former North Texas head coach Seth Littrell, who was a former player for the Sooners under Bob Stoops for the 2000 National Championship team. He was elevated from offensive analyst last year, and his last offensive coordinator job was under Larry Fedora at North Carolina in 2015. Some of those Tar Heel offenses did pretty well. Littrell, I think, did a fair job at North Texas with the resources that he had there. And so I think the Sooners have potential to be pretty good on offense. Jackson Arnold is a former five-star prospect who has been hyped up a good amount. I think he has a good chance to lead this offense fairly well. He'll have an emerging star transfer wide receiver from Purdue, Deion Burks. A couple of other guys to watch is running back Gavin Sawchuk and wide receiver Nick Anderson on the offensive side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, they also have a new look in defensive coordinator Jay Valai. He's a co-defensive coordinator with Zach Alley. Valai was the secondary coach last year, and that was the Sooners' best unit. On the defensive side of the ball, the Sooners were, I would say, middle of the road. They ranked 46th in scoring defense, 42nd in rushing defense, and a little bit lower, 77th in total yards per game allowed. But passing defense was their strength last year. They ranked 17th nationally, even in the Big 12, where they still throw the ball quite a bit. So I think that shows that the strength of the Sooners defensive coaching staff, which was the secondary last year and just the overall passing defense, is being elevated into that defensive coordinator position. So I think the new changes, obviously it's a new look on offense. They're going to be looking for just some familiarity early on, and I think that's helped. While the Sooners have a very tough schedule kind of in the back half, they have a very easy start, and I think it's kind of an opportunity for some easy early work for the sophomore cornerback Arnold. They're home against Temple, home against Houston, and home against Tulane. The Green Wave gave the Sooners a little bit of a scare, actually quite a bit of a scare in 2021. That game really went all the way down to the wire. I think it was a one-possession game, and so that one, you never know with the Green Wave. They've put together some pretty good seasons, obviously beating USC a couple of years ago in the Cotton Bowl. But aside from that, I think those first three games, Sooners, barring a collapse in one of those, should be 3-0, heading into a tough home game against Tennessee. I talked about the Volunteers in one of my last videos, talking about the importance of their matchup against North Carolina State in Week 2 in Charlotte. Those Volunteers will be the first test, I think, that the Sooners face this year. First four-quarter test. I think Tulane could maybe be a bit of a test for the first half. Houston might be a little interesting very early on in that one, but I don't expect the Cougars to hang around for too long. So that is the first real test. And then Arnold goes to, I think, one of the most underrated environments in college football. I think they get their due when they're doing well, but that's the Auburn Tigers, Jordan-Hare Stadium on the Plains in Auburn, Alabama. I think the Tigers are probably middle of the pack in the SEC this year, but that's when they're almost at their most dangerous, when you kind of don't expect them to be. You look at last year, came all the way down to fourth and goal from the 31, 4th and 31, as it's now known in college football lore, against Alabama. That game was on the Plains last year, and a tough test for Oklahoma early. I think they are probably likely to get through these two games unscathed, but I think that Auburn game they really have to be careful with. I think Tennessee, if they can get that win over NC State, they won't need that win over Oklahoma as much. Obviously, they'll be going for it because even in this world of college football where you could probably afford a loss or two, you're still obviously trying to win each game out there. It's not quite to the level of the NFL where you need more of a 17-game season versus one game at a time, and I know that's the message from coaches, but realistically speaking, you can afford to drop 4 or 5 in the NFL, really, unless you're going for that number 1 seed. So those two games are tough. They then get a very important bye week after traveling to Auburn in what should be, I think, a tough, probably physical battle, their first SEC road test. Then they have the big one, the Red River rivalry, the showdown, as it's now called, I think, as it's branded at least, at the Cotton Bowl, the first time these two teams meet as SEC foes. Texas, at worst, is coming into this one 4-1. They play at Michigan week 2. That's going to be a tough one. I think Texas will probably be slightly favored even in Ann Arbor, so I would expect them to be 5-0 heading into this one. But either way, these two teams are probably going to meet 4-1, 5-0 like they often do. And this game, it's going to be up against some big ones in week, I guess it's week 6, I think, or week 7 by then. Ohio State, Oregon is kind of, I think, the marquee matchup this week. But likely going up against a top 5 opponent, if the Sooners are able to start 5-0, they're probably looking certainly top 10, potentially top 5 as well. And by this point, if they are playing that well, Jackson Arnold will be in a groove. But this is a game where their really tough slate starts. They get a little bit of a respite the next week at home against South Carolina. I don't really expect the Gamecocks to prove too much of a challenge, but sometimes they can test these really good teams. Then the following week, this is where their passing defense could be very important. They go to the Grove against Ole Miss in week 9 on October 26th. This is likely a top 10, maybe if the Rebels drop a couple of games or a game or two, top 15 matchup. This is a very tough one. Jackson Dart leads that high-powered passing offense, but I think the secondary that the Sooners have, which they run a 4-3 defense. They have a couple of cornerbacks, Woody Washington and Gentry Williams, and then strong safety Peyton Bowen and free safety Billy Bowman. And then kind of in the middle of that unit is obviously their playmaker, Danny Stutzman, who is All-American caliber linebacker who will lead this Sooners defense. I think they could be well-positioned. This is a really tough test as well, but the Sooners defense could be well-positioned based on matchups and what they'd excelled at least last year, and the fact that they're bringing back most of that back 7 of their defense could be very important in this matchup. Then they get a gimme at home against Maine, and then begins their toughest stretch of the season, one of the toughest 3-game stretches, I think, in college football this year. They go at Mizzou, who I think the Tigers, in terms of talent and what they're able to possess in terms of ability, will take a slight step back this year without Cody Schrader, but they still have Luther Burden at wide receiver, one of the best in the country. They have quarterback Brady Cook coming back as well. So they still possess one of the best teams. They have a pretty easy schedule. I would expect Mizzou to be probably 1, maybe 2 losses, potentially undefeated. I'll take a deeper look at the Tigers when we get into kind of SEC preview territory. And kind of on that, I'm going to be starting out kind of previews, more of like a team-by-team basis with the ACC newcomers. So keep an eye out for that video in the coming days. But back to this, again, stay tuned for that. Then they're home against Alabama. I think it's good to be able to get the Crimson Tide at home. It'll be interesting to see where Kalen DeBoer and the Tide are at by this point in the season. But that's certainly a tough matchup. And then, similar to the Ole Miss game, they're going to have LSU on the road in Death Valley. That is a tough test, a really tough way to end the season. And it's the type of game where both of these teams could be sitting at 2 or 3 losses. You win this game, you're right on the edge or maybe clinching your spot in the college football playoff. You lose this game and you're probably out. That one has high stakes. It's the last of 3 games that I expect to be against top 15 opponents. These Sooners, I think, are guaranteed of at least 5 wins. The other 7 are very tough. It's a little bit tough to predict because we don't know how Oklahoma is going to stack up in the SEC. I think with a guy like Brent Venables, who helped run a defense that prided itself on toughness and physicality and just excelling at all levels at Clemson, if he can get that get the Sooners defense playing like that this year, they kind of made steps towards that last year. Can they make that next step to get into kind of that, top 20, top 15 defense, where last year they were kind of more around that top 30 defense, maybe even top 40. Passing game certainly elevated it overall. So if they can take a step forward, I think the offense has the tools. Again, it's a new look. I think they benefit from the early part of their schedule being favorable. I think these Sooners probably finish. I could see them again. I could see them getting through the first 5 unscathed, 5-0. I think Texas is probably a loss. I think South Carolina and Maine are both gimme wins. So they're sitting, with those games included, probably at 1 loss heading into that 3-game slate to finish the end of the season. Ole Miss, I'll have to look at that matchup a little bit more before I make a call on that one. I think that one's a bit of a toss-up. It favors the Rebels being in Oxford, but that final stretch, I think these Sooners can probably get through that at 2-1, so they're probably going to need that one against Ole Miss to get in the playoff. I think 10-2 is achievable. I would maybe venture to say that their ceiling is 11-1. I think 10-2 is maybe a more realistic ceiling, and I think their floor is probably as bad as 7-5 if they just can't get the defense collectively working in some of these big games, or the offense can't quite muster enough. But that's my look at the Sooners. Let me know in the comments below your prediction on what OU's record will be in 2024. Let me know your thoughts on any other schedule dives that you want me to get into. Again, if you want to look back three or so weeks ago, I dove into the Florida Gators schedule. But if you stuck around to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.